Hi, everyone. The clock has struck 11, so I will begin, even as folks filter in. But thank you for coming to my talk, Schema-Driven Testing with Mock Service Worker. My name is Alessia Bellisario, and I'm excited to talk about this topic today. So we'll be discussing Mock Service Worker and GraphQL testing library, which is the library that did not yet have a name at the time that this talk proposal was due. But yeah, let's get started. So I'll start with a quick intro slide. I'm an engineer at Apollo, as I mentioned in my preview this morning, where I work on Apollo Client. I'm at Alessia Bell on the internet, on X and GitHub. And I live in NYC with my wife, Carla, and our son. And a fun fact about me is that I hold 3 passports. I'm what my mother calls a triple threat now, that I got my American citizenship this year in February. So that is the picture outside the courthouse in downtown Manhattan. And another fun fact, actually, about my wife, she's a federal lawyer who works in that building. So our son got to visit Mama's work that day, too. And I love this picture because he so clearly is about to pass out for a nap. He was like 2.5 here. And yeah, he was in that courtroom for about 3.5 hours. So it was a long morning, but yeah, something I'm very proud of. So I'm Canadian by birth, of Italian heritage, and I've lived in the US for 8 years now. And so, this was a momentous day for many reasons. Many of the profound ones I won't bore you with, but one of the trivial ones is that I got to cheer for Team USA women's basketball this year at the Paris Olympics for the first time as a citizen. And any basketball fans in the audience? Just okay, I see some hands. Okay, I see some hoopers. I'm a huge basketball fan. I'll still be rooting for Canada at the Winter Olympics. But yeah, this was cool. So this was a record-breaking 8th straight gold medal for this team here. And there'll be some basketball references today, so I had to set the stage here. But I want to start with a segment that I'm calling Last Time On GraphQL Conf. This is our second GraphQL Conf, as we heard this morning from Lee. But last year's was jam-packed. It had some amazing talks, including this talk by Stephanie Saunders from Coinbase, a talk that was titled Sophisticated Schema Mocking. And here, Stephanie was talking about her team's journey through building some of the testing infrastructure at Coinbase to support a number of teams and test a number of applications. And I love this, and this is sort of the screen grab that I chose, obviously, because this recap slide was very poignant. And it calls out a number of common issues, common pain points with a lot of existing testing solutions. Some of them general purpose, like Knock and Mock Service Worker, which is up here. And then also some testing tools provided by the client libraries, like Apollo and Relay. Now, apologies for the folks in the back, because I know this room is kind of narrow and long, so I don't know if folks can read everything on here. But one of the things, the bullet points that recurs a number of times is static mocks. Static mocks, they're really painful to work with. And can I see a show of hands, like who has had to write a static mock in your test file? Okay, this is about 95% of the room. And so I'm guessing that folks in the room have felt this pain before, where these tests, these mocks don't scale very well, right? They're brittle. They don't evolve as your query that you're making in your component or your app grows over time. There's a lot of repetition, and there's just, they can be very verbose, right? They're very long. And there's also, some challenges here with, with some of the Relay testing utilities, having to mock operations in a specific order. Testing frameworks that just prescribe, quite a bit in the setup and how you have to write your tests. And so as I was going through, as I was thinking about this, because as an Apollo client maintainer, by the way, I was nodding along to that entire talk. I just thought it raised so many great points and pain points that I knew are common throughout the JavaScript kind of subset of the GraphQL ecosystem. And so I came up with this wish list of what would a really great testing tool be able to deliver. The first that I think are really table stakes is this idea of schema-based mocking. We have this amazing language, as we heard this morning, this SDL, to express the schema of our entire graph. And we should be able to leverage this to create tests, to create a testing tool that doesn't force us to handwrite every single field in a JSON response that we want to render in our app. The second one is we want to exercise the network layer abstraction. And this varies across different sophisticated clients. In Apollo client, it's the link chain. In Relay, it's the network layer. In urql, there's a concept of an exchange. But basically, you have some abstraction where you might have some logic around retries or network error handling, things that are specific to your application that you need to be able to test against, right? We want to be able to include this in the code path that gets executed when we're writing our tests. Third, subscriptions. A lot of testing utilities don't necessarily include subscriptions because they're a little bit different, right? They often use a different protocol to communicate with the server. And fourth, incremental delivery, something we already heard about in our opening keynote remarks at various points. We want to be able to write tests that actually exercise the part of our client that's handling the multi-part response. We want to make sure that our app behaves as we expect it to when we're annotating our requests with these directives. And then finally, we want this testing utility to be compatible with any environment. And here I wrote Apollo client, but you can sub in any client that you can think of, any environment that it runs in today. So this critically includes React Native. OK, so the first point on that list is talking about schema-based mocking. And I'll go through this fairly quickly. But we have some great utilities that are scoped under the GraphQL tools organization that are maintained by the Guild that are really critical pieces of infrastructure in our GraphQL community to help build tooling that leverages these. So many of you will be familiar with some of these functions like add resolvers to schema and make executable schema from the GraphQL tools schema package. And this allows us to really easily create a mock schema with custom resolvers that we write, to also mock scalar values or any type in our schema. And the executor function, which gives us this execute function that can generate incremental payloads if there's a defer or stream directive present. But this is not a new concept, right? Like these tools, these GraphQL tools packages have been around for a long time. And folks have been leveraging them to do schema-driven testing since at least 2018. This is a Medium post by former Apollo client maintainer and Apollonaut Sashko, who later was at Stripe and wrote about their migration to taking a new approach to mocking GraphQL data using these tools. And so here's the diff that the screen grab is from the article. Again, apologies if you can't read this. All you need to kind of grok from this is that on the left is the old test using the Apollo client mocked provider utility, which requires you to write static response mocks. You have to specify the query, which has to match the query that your component is requesting. And then it will return this result object that you have to fill in. And what they've replaced it with is this component called Apollo Test Provider, which accepts some custom resolvers. And these are going to be passed to those utilities we just saw, add mocks to schema, and just dry up this test, because the only salient piece of information on the left is that the default currency for this test has to be USD, right? That's the thing we really care about. So why can't we just have a custom resolver or a mock resolver in our test dictate that fact, right? And yeah, sorry, this is kind of blocked for folks in the front. I will post these slides as well. So now looking at our wish list, we can see that number 1 and number 4, we have our bases covered here. We know, the packages that we can stitch together to achieve this, but we still have a few big questions to answer here. And the next point I want to talk about is the second bullet point here, exercising the network layer abstraction, because this is trickier, I think. We want to be able to test the link chain or the network layer or the exchange if you're using urql or something else, right? But are we going to mock fetch? Probably don't want to do that. That is it really just as soon as we start monkeying around and patching globals like fetch, we're probably not going to have a good time. And then if we're going to think about maybe do we want to write a custom link, something that we can swap in so that instead of making a fetch request at the end of all of these transformations at the network layer, we can just generate a result using that executor package and return that result and render our component. But again, that's taking us away from testing our true application code, because now we're writing new logic and swapping out links and exchanges for different environments, and it just becomes really murky very quickly. So what about mock service worker? I know in Stephanie's slide, there were still some things that were lacking or that Stephanie found pain points around last year. But I would rephrase this as why mock service worker now? Because mock service worker has had a major release since Stephanie's talk last year. And it's introduced a lot of really amazing APIs. And so I think as a community, we need to take a closer look. And GraphQL testing library is a big part of how to make it easier to adopt mock service worker when you're using GraphQL. So first, just a quick overview for folks who aren't familiar or as familiar with mock service worker. Mock service worker uses the service worker API as its name would indicate. But it's really kind of magical the first time you use it, because it allows you to intercept actual production requests on the network level. And instead of patching fetch or meddling with your application's integrity, you can use standard browser APIs to implement some request interception logic. And that's what makes mock service worker fully environment, framework, and tool agnostic. So you can use it in any browser or Node.js process without any configurations, adapters, or plugins. So this means it works with all request clients, be it a native window.fetch call or any third-party libraries. The mock service worker docs name a bunch of them, and it's anything from Axios to Apollo. And this means that you can use the exact same API mocks during development, integration, and end-to-end testing, and then in your Storybook, as we'll see, or during a live demo. It's super, super cool. And the new API really leverages and uses the platform. So each intercepted request is just a request instance, and each mocked response is a response. And this means, as we'll see, that it means that version 2 has support for readable streams. Text streaming is really important with a lot of new GraphQL features. And WebSocket support is almost stable. It's really incredible. And so if you haven't seen a mock service worker request handler, here is a very high-level snapshot of what that might look like using version 2 APIs, which have been out since October of last year. So here, this is a request handler that intercepts any GraphQL operation, and that GraphQL class is exported by mock service worker. So you can intercept any operation, and as hopefully folks can see, if it's not too small for folks in the back, you can return this HTTP response class, which is a drop-in replacement for the fetch API's response. So you can use the native fetch response API if you'd like, but there's just some additional, kind of nice-to-haves that are layered on top with HTTP response that we get from mock service worker, like mocking response cookies and things like that. So here we can parse the document from our query, and if it has a defer or stream directive, we can stream a response. I've cut out the boring part of generating all of those responses. Or you can return a single JSON result. So now let's look at, OK, we hopefully understand what mock service worker does. But what is GraphQL testing library? And for that, we're going to look at a demo. And so here we have an app that is built with Relay. So we have our query. We're fetching a list of products. Each product has an ID, a title, and an image, a media URL. And it also has reviews. It has some ratings. So we've already extracted those reviews into their own fragment. Spoiler alert, we're going to defer this fragment in the future. But right now, we've just spread that fragment in there. And in our app, this is how we're querying our API. We're using Relay's use lazy load query hook. Very intentionally, we're not prefetching the data or fetching it kind of higher up in the page's lifecycle because we want to compare and contrast before and after when we're using defer here. So we're fetching our products. And then we're going to just render them all. And for each product, we'll render its reviews within a suspense fallback there. OK, so this is what this looks like on our page. Right now, it's taking quite some time to load. But then all the products and reviews are rendered all at once, right? And when we look in the dev tools here in the network tab, we can see the request URL that we're making this request to. This is a graph that's deployed using GraphOS. And we see our 200 OK result. Everything looks good. But we saw that page load time was quite slow. It's like 1,500 milliseconds or something like that. So we've figured out that we need to defer the reviews. That resolver is a little bit slow. And so let's see how this feels once we've deferred. And the only code change so far is just adding that defer directive to the reviews. Our backend supports the defer directive. So now we see a faster initial load. And in Relay, we're using useFragment. And so those components that render the reviews are suspending while those chunks come in. And so this is just setting the table here to see this is making a network request across the network to our deployed graph. And now let's see how we can mock this. And this is also in the dev tools in the network tab, what our multi-part response looks like. OK, so now we're rendering this component in Storybook. And we want to create a mock service worker handler to mock out this request. So we're going to import create handler from the package Apollo/GraphQL testing library. And we pass in the schema and your mock resolvers that you want to use. So in this case, we're going to have some mock data there, map over it, and specify the title and the media URL. And mock service worker has a Storybook integration. It's super simple to set up. And you just set the handler on the parameters of your story. So we're using this for hundreds of Storybook stories internally at Apollo for component testing. And it's really, really nice to be able to use it with Storybook and use these handlers in different contexts in very different ways. And so now this is our mock data just being rendered. All that I've done is set that mock service worker handler on the story. And what we can see is we only set the image URL and the title. We didn't set any mock resolvers around the ratings. So because we're using GraphQL tools under the hood, the ratings are actually in our schema. They're a float. And so every time we re-render, we're going to pick a random value. The tooling underneath is just, when we get down to to resolve that field, we haven't specified any mock data, so we get a random value. But our component can render, and we didn't have to specify more than we needed to render the data, the mock data that we wanted to see. And this is how it looks in the browser. So if we pop that open, we see the identical request URL. It's still making a real fetch request in the browser to our deployed hack the e-commerce graph on GraphOS. But in our status code, we see a 200 OK from service worker. That's doing a lot of lifting there. It's telling us that, something else entirely is resolving this request. But what if we don't want to see, -36/5 as the rating? Well, you can also specify mocks for any scalar value or any type in your schema. So this gets really flexible and really powerful. And here, once we specify that all floats should just be a 5.0, we have our 5 out of 5 ratings here. And again, this is still the same relay app using defer, and it was built to, again, query that backend. But what if you want to use these mock service worker handlers in your Jest tests or vtest, or some testing environment that's going to run in a Node.js process? Mock service worker gives you an API for that. So it's this MSW/node entry point. You pass your handlers to this setup server, and there's like one other setup thing that you have to call. You have to initialize this before all your tests and tear it down after. I'm not going to show you every single line of code, but it's very straightforward. And as soon as you do that, you can your mock service worker handler is going to be able to resolve requests that are running in Node as well. So here, in individual tests, when you want to use a different set of mock resolvers, GraphQL testing library gives you this with resolvers API, this function this method that exists on the handler, and it's going to just merge those new resolvers that you're passing with the old ones, and give you this capability to have to start with a base set of mock resolvers when you first define the handler, and then in individual tests you can layer on, and then ultimately restore and sort of take off, pop off the stack, these varying mock resolvers that you want to use. So in this case, we have an app that's built with Apollo Client that's using the exact same handler that was just being used with our Relay app in the browser. And here, this Apollo Client app is making a request to that same endpoint, and it's going to be intercepted and resolved with the mock data that we want for this test. So now we go back to our wish list. That was a lot. Thank you for sticking with me through that. We've checked off 4 out of the 5 items on our wish list, but there's still one more thing, and that is subscription support. So I mentioned that WebSocket support is coming very soon, and that is thanks to all the work by Artem, the mock service worker creator and maintainer, who just does so much work to promote good testing practices and to just push these ideas forward. So I want to give Artem a shout out. And one thing about subscriptions, obviously, a lot of folks use WebSockets to do the client to server communication, but there are other protocols that folks are using for client to server communications. And GraphQL testing library wants to be able to support them all. So we want to be the one-stop shop for any GraphQL operation using mock service worker, but WebSockets are a big part of that. The WebSocket branch, the PR in MSW, is almost done. I think there's like one more issue that needs to be fixed, but that has been a ton of work, and it's coming very soon. And I'm using a preview of it here to build this app. So actually, this one is this is without MSW. So I think if I start my demo here, so the WNBA tipped off in June 1997. So let's say we're building the premier 1997 WNBA fan site with 2024 tech. I think this is what you would arrive at, obviously. So this is the app that is talking to an Express server over WebSockets. And it's also doing a mutation when you change the team. So we have all three operation types represented here. In the future, in the very, very near future, this is what you'll be able to do. You'll be able to import create WebSocket handler from GraphQL testing library and create a mock service worker handler that can handle a resolver like this, like something that would be able to fulfill that subscription using this async generator function that's going to return your async iterator. And so using the branch of GraphQL testing library that I have on my machine, you get this. And on the previous slide, I think the logic here is like, flip a coin for whether the next basket is a 2 or a 3, and then also flip a coin to see whether we give it to the home team or the away team. But yes, I'm almost at the end of my time, and so I'll wrap things up. I wanted to just say thanks to Artem for his tireless work again, and really just drive home, hopefully, the point that you've taken away, which is GraphQL and mock service worker can be really amazing together. And I think we're on the cusp of being able to make this adoption path just so much easier. Mock service worker is incredibly powerful. And with the underlying SDL and all the tools that we already have in GraphQL, we need to make it a lot easier to pair these two amazing technologies. And hopefully, that's what you'll be able to do with GraphQL testing library. So the docs are live. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I really hope that you'll check it out. And I have like 2.5 minutes to take some questions right now if anyone has questions. But thank you very much. Yeah. Yes, and I have a mic, or you can shout it out, because I'll shout it out. Okay, or actually, just for the recording, actually, because I didn't double check. Hold on, where's the, wow, if you can find, is it on the bottom? Yeah. Thanks, Jeff.
Check.
Thank you. For Node.js, the mock service worker, I'm curious, does it handle both the HTTP client and the fetch implementation, which is a completely different stack from HTTP?
Yes, so great question. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. But yes, of course, because there are no service workers in Node.js. So it uses a class extension instead of like module patching. And so it allows you to use the same request handlers and request handlers. And so yes, you don't have to write separate handlers for Node.js. So does that answer your question?
Not quite. What I was trying to ask is, basically, instead of, like in the case of like Axios and them, they all use the old HTTP implementation to create like a client message and so forth, right? And instead of going through the network and going down to the socket layer, they mock that part, right? But fetch uses a different internal implementation. Mm-hmm. So it's not implemented using HTTP, which is a very old part of the Node stack. It uses a completely new implementation called Undici. And so that's why I was wondering, is like if I call fetch and mock service worker is set up, then is it going to go to Undici inside Node, or is it going to go to mock service worker?
Yes, so you do have to, so this seems to depend on the testing framework in the sense that in Jest, you have to mock certain globals with Undici. You do have to configure that and set up those mocks. That's actually in the GraphQL testing docs. In vtest, you don't have to configure those mocks. and I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe someone with VTest knowledge wants to jump in, but yeah, there's a little bit of extra boilerplate with Jest when you're configuring your setup, so that's something to be mindful of. But yeah, I know Artem is a big fan of VTest for that reason, is really pushing the community to adopt tools that don't require additional configuration like that. So
thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, thank you.
Hi.
We have a massive test suite, and we try to keep the tests synchronous where possible. And we're using Relay, and so I'm going to just assume that you have experience with the mock payload generator that they have and their testing setup.
A little bit.
Okay.
Yep. Not in in as large a test suite as you, for sure.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, like, are we able to use the core here? Like, mock payload generator has some limitations. We have built one that is spec compliant, but would we be able to use the core of this for that payload generation in a similar way, or do we have to go through these network abstractions, which probably would introduce some asynchronicity?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I would say the genesis of GraphQL testing library is really inspired by React testing library. It's where the name comes from, and also with the testing library family of testing libraries and utilities. In their docs, the main sort of preferred way of mocking the network layer is mock service worker. And those tests are all async. They're testing user interactions, and it's really popularized by Ken C. Dodds, the creator, who talks about testing your apps the way users use your apps. So fundamentally, there's going to be asynchronicity in your tests if you're adhering to that philosophy, right? I'm not sure of the specifics of your tests, but if that's not the approach that you've taken, it's probably not a library that would make sense for you in that way, because again, it's library and testing framework agnostic, but whether you're using it in the browser or in Node.js paired with some of these other libraries, there's going to be async aspects to your tests. But what I will say is the underlying, the underlying utilities for creating the mock schema, those are all using GraphQL tools. So if that's the layer that you're interested in, and maybe pairing that with something more specific to your testing setup, then I'd encourage you to check those out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Really simple one. Server-side events with subscriptions, is that already happening?
Yeah. So server-side events, that is something that I really want to add to, or server-side events, it's something I really want to add to GraphQL testing library, and something that we can do today because of readable stream being supported, and the fact that MSW uses the platform. That is SSE as well as Apollo's own subscriptions over multi-part HTTP protocol. Those are both things that I plan to add very soon. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Great. I think I'm probably at time. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, feel free to grab me in the hallway. Chat more. Thanks.